Before Vienna, there was only silence, a wide river bend at the edge of ancient Europe. The Danube rolled through untouched lowlands, wild forests reaching to the waterline. Celts settled these banks around 500 BC, building their homes on fertile, rising ground. They called this place Vindobona, the White Fields, where the wide river bent the sky. For centuries, the Celts fished, traded, and grew their crops beneath a quiet, open sky. Then the horizon changed. Roman legions arrived from the south, marching in tight formation. By 15 BC, Rome had claimed the Great Danube as its border, and Vindobona as its fortress. Stone walls rose on the riverbank, permanent, heavy, and built to last 1,000 years. The Romans brought roads, law, and heated bathhouses to the edge of the Germanic world. A garrison of 6,000 soldiers called this cold northern outpost their distant home. Merchants followed the legions, setting up busy markets just beyond the military gate. Amphorae of wine, olive oil, and spices moved through streets that smelled of ambition. The Danube became Rome's lifeline, ships carrying grain and orders from the Eternal City. Vindobona grew, block by block, into something more than a camp, a real civilization. Marcus Aurelius wrote parts of his meditations here, on this wind-swept Danubian shore. The philosopher-emperor died at Vindobona in 180 AD, leaving wisdom and an empire behind. But the empire that gave the city life would also begin to take it away by slow degrees. By the 3rd century, the borders cracked. Germanic tribes pressed harder every season. The legions thinned out, the walls crumbled slowly, and the Danube lost its Roman peace. When Rome finally fell in 476 AD, Vindobona was already a shadow of what it had been. Lombards, Avars, and Slavic tribes swept through the ruins of Rome's northernmost wall. For nearly 4 centuries, the city passed through many hands and forgot its own name. Out of that long darkness, the Carolingians came, Charlemagne's empire reaching east. By 800 AD, the region around the Danube became known as the Ostmark, the Eastern March. A fortified settlement reappeared near the old Roman ruins, small but full of purpose. In 881 AD, a chronicle records the name Vienna for the very first time in all history. The Babenberg dynasty claimed the region and began to turn a frontier post into a capital. In 1137, Vienna was formally recognized as a city, a landmark moment in the young town's life. Churches rose above the rooflines. Markets hummed with commerce from east and west alike. The Babenbergs played the great medieval game, trading marriages for land, faith for power. Duke Henry II founded new monasteries and invited scholars, merchants, and craftsmen here. Vienna became a crossing point between the Germanic West and the Byzantine and Slavic East. By 1200, the city had grown large enough to need new walls, thick stone replacing old timber. Then came the Mongols. In 1241, their armies devastated Hungary and Poland without mercy. Vienna trembled at the news, but was spared, geography and fear doing the work of armies. But the Babenberg line ended suddenly in 1246, leaving Vienna without a dynasty or a guide. After years of conflict, Rudolf of Habsburg seized the city and the region around it in 1276. No one knew that this quiet act would create one of history's longest reigning dynasties. The Habsburgs had arrived at last, and Vienna would never be the same city ever again. For 6 centuries, the House of Habsburg would use Vienna as the engine of their ambitions. Under Rudolf III, the city became an administrative center, the hinge of a growing empire. Vienna's merchants grew rich on trade routes connecting Venice, Prague, and Krakow in one arc. St. Stephen's Cathedral began rising in the mid-1300s, stone upon stone, decade after decade. Its south tower, completed in 1433, became the city's heartbeat and its most visible landmark. The spire pierced the clouds at 136 meters, the tallest structure the city had ever dared build. Vienna was becoming beautiful. Courts of musicians, artists, and philosophers gathered within, but beauty invited danger. In 1349, the Black Death arrived and gutted the city from within. 1 in 3 Viennese died in the first wave. Bodies piled in carts, churches overwhelmed. The plague returned again and again over the following decades, each time reshaping the city. Vienna grieved, prayed, and rebuilt, again and again, with each new generation more defiant. By the late 1400s, Emperor Frederick III had made Vienna the formal capital of the Holy Empire. Under Maximilian III, the court became a magnet for talent from every corner of known Europe. Printing presses arrived. Universities expanded. The Renaissance had found a northern home. Music filled the streets. The Viennese had already begun to fall in love with melody and song. Then the greatest crisis of the medieval era appeared on the eastern horizon, like a dark storm. In 1529, Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent marched on Vienna with an army of 120,000. The city walls held, barely. Rain, cold, and long supply lines forced the Ottomans to retreat. Vienna had survived, but the memory of that siege would haunt the city for generations more. The Habsburgs responded by spending decades rebuilding and reinforcing every wall and gate. Vienna became a fortress as much as a capital, defiance carved into every stone and rampart. The Reformation brought a new kind of war. This one fought with pamphlets and conviction. Protestant ideas swept through Vienna in the 1520s, splitting families and parishes in half. The Habsburg response was swift and uncompromising. The Counter-Reformation would begin here. Jesuit schools, new churches, and relentless pressure slowly drew Vienna back to Rome's embrace. The 30 Years' War ravaged Central Europe from 1618 to 1648 with extraordinary cruelty. Vienna was the political center of the Catholic cause, besieged not by armies, but by chaos. When the war finally ended, the city emerged shaken but unbroken, still the imperial heart. Then, in 1679, plague returned on a devastating scale. Over 75,000 people died in months. Emperor Leopold V fled the city, returning only when the dying finally, slowly, stopped. Vienna responded to grief with a monument. The Pestsäule, or Plague Column, still stands today. It was a city that refused to stop building even when it was still in the middle of burying. Then came 1683, the Second Ottoman Siege, even larger than the first and even more terrifying. Kara Mustafa Pasha led 140,000 troops, digging tunnels beneath the walls to blast them apart. For 2 months, Vienna was encircled, starved, and battered, the empire hanging by a thread. On September 12th, the relief army arrived, Polish King John Sobieski leading the cavalry charge. The Ottoman army broke and fled. Vienna was saved, and the history of Europe was rewritten. No city celebrated like Vienna that autumn. Bells ringing, bonfires blazing across the hills. The victory unleashed a golden age, a burst of Baroque architecture unlike anything before. Johann Fischer von Erlach designed the Karlskirche, a dome of faith over a city of triumph. The Upper Belvedere Palace rose, and the Schönbrunn expanded into a rival of Versailles itself. Vienna in 1700 was a city of imperial swagger, fountains, gilded ceilings, and absolute power. The population surpassed 200,000, making it one of the largest cities in all of Europe now. Coffeehouses appeared, brought, legend says, by bags of coffee left by the retreating Ottomans. Citizens gathered in these new spaces to read, debate, argue, and dream of better tomorrows. Haydn composed nearby. Mozart arrived as a child prodigy and lit up every hall in the city. Beethoven moved to Vienna in 1792 and would spend the rest of his difficult life composing here. By 1800, Vienna had become the undisputed capital of European music, a city born for sound. Schubert walked these streets. Brahms would follow, and later, Mahler, Bruckner, and Strauss. But Napoleonic storms were gathering. The French emperor had designs on the Habsburg throne. In 1805, Napoleon captured Vienna without firing a single shot. The gates opened before him. The imperial court fled. The French army marched in. The city endured humiliation in silence. Napoleon occupied Vienna again in 1809, this time bombing the city walls from outside the gates. Beethoven hid in a cellar, covering his ears with pillows against the thunder of the cannons. When Napoleon fell in 1815, Vienna hosted the Congress. Diplomats from across all of Europe. For months, the city became the center of the world. Parties, negotiations, and secret deals. Metternich's Vienna was brilliant on the surface and deeply repressive underneath the surface. The Biedermeier era followed, citizens retreating into home, music, art, and quiet family life. But underneath, revolution was brewing. In March 1848, Vienna's streets erupted into barricades. Students and workers demanded a constitution, freedom of the press, and an end to censorship. Metternich fled in disguise. The old order cracked. A new age pressed hard against the walls. The revolt was crushed, but not erased. Young Emperor Franz Joseph I came to power at 18. He would rule for 68 years, the longest and most transformative reign in the city's modern life. Under Franz Joseph, Vienna was literally torn apart and rebuilt on a breathtaking imperial scale. The old city walls came down in 1857, and in their place, the Ringstrasse began to rise. A grand boulevard of museums, opera houses, parliament buildings, and theaters took their place. The Vienna State Opera opened in 1869, a cathedral of music inside the heart of the empire. By 1900, Vienna's population had exploded to 2 million, a city of refugees and dreamers alike. Czechs, Poles, Hungarians, Jews, Croats, Slovaks, all poured in seeking the promise of the city. Vienna became a laboratory for the modern world, restless, brilliant, contradictory, and alive. Sigmund Freud was mapping the human mind from a small apartment on the Berggasse in the city. Gustav Klimt was painting gold and desire onto canvas in his studio near the Vienna Secession. Theodor Herzl was writing The Jewish State in a Viennese cafe, dreaming of a nation from exile. Adolf Hitler arrived from Linz in 1907, rejected by the Art Academy, bitter and resentful here. The seeds of catastrophe and the seeds of brilliance were growing in the same Vienna soil. Then 1914 arrived, and with it, a single gunshot in Sarajevo that shattered everything. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Habsburg throne, was assassinated on June 28, 1914. Vienna declared war within weeks. The empire's wheels, long rusted, lurched into fatal motion. 4 years later, the war that Vienna helped start had consumed 10 million lives across Europe. In November 1918, the Habsburg Empire collapsed, 6 centuries of dynasty gone in a matter of days. Karl I abdicated. The empire dissolved into 7 successor states overnight without ceremony. Vienna, once the capital of 52 million subjects, suddenly found itself leading a tiny nation. The city that had ruled an empire now governed only 6 million people and its own fading glory. The interwar years brought poverty, hunger, and bitter political violence to the Viennese streets. Red Vienna, a socialist city government, built public housing, schools, and hospitals for all. The Karl-Marx-Hof, completed in 1930, became a symbol of the workers' city within a fallen empire. But in February 1934, the Austrian government bombarded its own workers' housing with artillery. The social democratic dream was crushed in 4 brutal days of civil war on Vienna's own streets. Then came 1938. Hitler returned to the city that had once rejected him, this time as conqueror. On March the 12th, German troops crossed into Austria and were welcomed by roaring, cheering crowds. Vienna's Jews, 200,000 of them, were immediately targeted, humiliated, beaten, and then deported. The city that had given the world Freud, Mahler, and Wittgenstein watched them be taken away. By 1945, the war that Vienna had helped ignite twice was ending, this time in rubble and shame. Soviet forces fought their way through the city in April 1945, street by street and floor by floor. The opera was bombed. St. Stephen's burned. The Ringstrasse stood cracked under a gray April sky. Vienna lay divided into 4 occupation zones: American, British, French, and Soviet sectors. For 10 years, the city lived under the unresolved tension of post-war superpower occupation. Then, in 1955, against all expectations, Austria signed a treaty and the occupiers all went home. Vienna became a neutral city in the Cold War, hosting UN offices, embassies, and secret talks. The State Opera reopened in 1955 to Beethoven's Fidelio, the city claiming its identity back. Vienna refused to remain a ruin. Street by street, building by building, it began to rebuild. Today, Vienna is consistently ranked among the world's most livable cities, year after year. Home to nearly 2 million people, it remains the cultural and political heart of Central Europe. The coffeehouses still hum. The opera still sings. The Danube still moves through ancient bends. Vienna has been a Roman fort, a medieval market, an imperial capital, and a divided city. It has been bombed, besieged, occupied, liberated, humiliated, and celebrated beyond measure. And still it stands, restless, brilliant, improbably beautiful, and stubbornly, defiantly alive. If Vienna moved you, subscribe, because history's next city is even more extraordinary than this.